Hello, and thank you for joining me today for the first of my 3 webinar series called Cash is King. Today's webinar will look at the credit control procedures and the start of the life cycle of a debt and how you can best protect your business against debt which may increase given the current economic uncertainty. If you have any questions to ask in relation to this webinar, please feel free to contact me. My details are on the screen now. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Paul Abdey. I am an associate in the commercial litigation team dealing specifically with debt and insolvency issues. And as I say, if any questions stem from this webinar, please do contact me and hopefully I will be able to assist. So as I say, this is a series of webinars looking at cash for your business, as cash, as you will all know, is the lifeblood of your business, regardless of how many orders you have and how well your salespeople are doing. Without cash flow, your business can quickly start to fail. So this webinar, the first of 3, will look at how you get back to basics with your credit control procedures to protect your business. Just moving on now. So before credit control, before your sales team go out to get the orders, how can you best protect your business? Well, quite frankly, it's getting your terms and conditions correct from the outset. I would hasten to add that this webinar will only be looking at how you can protect your business in relation to debt recovery and cash flow. It won't look at other aspects of your terms and conditions. So please don't take this as any other advice in those terms. But in relation to debt and your cash flow, what should you include or look to include in your contracts and sales agreements? Well, the first port of call is to clearly state the payment terms for your invoices. This may sound like a very obvious thing to say, but so long as people are aware and know what is expected of them, then hopefully they will adhere to this. There certainly can't be any arguments down the line that they didn't know the terms of payment. The second point I would note is that do your terms and conditions include provision for you to add interest to unpaid invoices? This may sound like a small thing, and depending on the size of the invoice may only amount to a few pence if not pounds, but at least it would hopefully focus the customer's mind that if they do not pay on time, then that invoice could soon quickly increase in size. As well as interest, do you look to include provision to recover compensation or other legal costs? This again can obviously increase the debt and focus the mind of the debtor. It is arguable that a payment term to allow recovery of legal costs may or may not be enforceable in court. I say this because if you have a term which is used to attempt to recover legal costs in a small claims forum, and for those of you who don't know, a small claims forum is any debt up to £10,000. The court may look poorly on this and may say that the small claims general rule is that both sides bear their own cost regardless of the outcome. But at least if you have the term in there, it may be enforceable by the court, and it certainly is enforceable in terms of the fact you can claim those costs up to and including the court hearing. I would also say, even if you have all these provisions included within your contracts and sales agreements, you don't have to use them. It is entirely up to you whether or not those terms are used. So once you have the terms and conditions in place, all written nicely up, how do you incorporate those into your agreements with your customers? Quite clearly, this is where your sales team need to be properly trained, but fundamentally, the terms and conditions need to be brought to your customers' attention at the earliest possible time. The latest they can be drawn to your customer's attention is when they contract with you. So when they place an order, all sales documents would need to say sales subject to our terms and conditions and reference where they may be found, i.e. either on the back side of the sales document or on a website, etc., etc. After the contract has been formed, trying to incorporate terms and conditions is too late. The terms and conditions must be clear to everyone as and when the sales agreement is reached. I would say that sales people should be trained to bring the terms and conditions to the customer's attention during the sales procedure, i.e. at the very beginning, after you've discussed what the customer needs, what products they need, they should say, okay, that's fine, but this sale is subject to our terms and conditions, and here's where they can be found. I note, finally on the slide, beware of the battle of the forms. What do I mean by this? If you're dealing with larger companies who have their own sets of terms and conditions, you could be trapped in a situation where, despite having all singing, all dancing terms and conditions, it is actually the other side's terms and conditions which take priority. How does this happen? Well, fundamentally, if the other side's last set of terms and conditions are those which are provided rather than yours, then it is their terms and conditions which will apply. An example, the other side come to you and say, we want to place order for X, Y, and Z products. You say, fine, okay, we can supply X, Y, and Z products, and it's subject to our terms and conditions herewith. The other side respond and say, okay, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. We're looking forward to receiving X, Y, and Z products. And by the way, our terms and conditions apply, and here's where they can be found. You don't notice that. You fail to respond and say no, or discuss what terms and conditions should apply. In that situation, the last sets of terms and conditions brought to the attention are the other side's terms and conditions, and it is those which will apply. So be very clear and very careful on that, and it's a training point for your sales team, I would suggest. So moving on. Just some facts and figures which I've obtained from the internet regarding debt levels from 2016. I couldn't find any from 2017, so these are now just slightly over a couple of years old. And it puts into focus how important credit control and the debt cycle is to certainly smaller and medium-sized businesses. So the stats, what do they say? Businesses with a turnover of less than £1 million wait on average 71 days, over 2 months, for invoices to be paid. Businesses of between £1 to £5 million turnover wait, I say only, obviously it's still quite a large time, but wait 53 days for payment of invoices. Now clearly I don't know the reason behind that, but I would guess, and it is only a guess, that the businesses with the larger turnover have more funds to invest into a credit control team and therefore are able to get invoices paid at a speedier rate. That is my belief on these figures, and hopefully will show how important credit control is and what an impact an improved credit control team can have to your business. From late last year, 2017, larger companies have had to report payment practices. In other words, larger companies were asked to name and shame how quickly or otherwise they pay invoices presented to them. The average wait time for payment of invoices for nearly a quarter was relatively good. 22% of these larger companies paid invoices between 29 and 35 days. What isn't reflected in these figures is the payment terms of the invoice, but if we assume the payment terms were 30 days, then a quarter of larger companies pay within that time or just slightly after. What is shocking, however, is that 13% of companies pay between 43 and 49 days. So on a 30-day invoice, that's up to 19 days late, should I say. And 2% of larger companies take over 78 days and more to pay invoices, i.e. over 2 months. I don't know how the stats will show for this year when they're released, but clearly there is a real issue here with the larger companies taking forever to make payment of invoices which are validly produced. Hopefully the payment practices will create what it's meant to and name and shame those which don't pay on time. We will see as the figures are released for this year. So more specifically for your business, what can you do at the credit control stage and before to safeguard your business? Well, I've mentioned terms and conditions. Once the terms and conditions are handed to your sales team, do they appreciate the importance of not only the terms and conditions, but the agreement they are asking the customer to sign up to? Your sales team is your first contact with the customer and your first opportunity to implement an effective credit control procedure. And certainly that is how this should be viewed, not just a simple way to get monies in, or should I say, to get an agreement reached. Obviously, you can have umpteen number of agreements in place. Unless they are paid, that is no good to your business. So, and this comes down to a training point for your sales team. Do they know all the elements of the agreement they are asking the customer to sign up to? From our point of view as lawyers, if we have to issue proceedings for an unpaid invoice or an unpaid debt, the most important point we ask is, who is the debtor? What is the debtor's legal identity? And this is where your sales team come into it. They should know and take all information possible in relation to the customer. In terms of the customer's legal identity, the sales team should be aware of the difference between a limited company, a trading identity, and a sole trader or a partnership. They should ask who they are contracting with. Quite frankly, we have seen an umpteen number of times a debt which just references, for example, Smith's Butchers. Who is Smith's Butchers? Is it Smith's Butchers Limited? Is it Mr. Smith trading as Smith's Butchers? Is it a family enterprise running as a partnership? Although maybe not important when the sales agreement is reached, it is of course vitally important when it comes to issuing legal proceedings. So your sales team must be aware of that and get the information accordingly. Equally, they should obtain all possible contact details for your customer, phone numbers, addresses, email addresses. All that information is important if and when it gets to the point where you need to contact the customer and potentially issue proceedings. It may seem obvious, but the amount of times we see agreements which have very, very small amounts of information, which really does not help us as lawyers. For limited companies, and this may depend on the size of the order, but do you, as a matter of course, ask for a director's personal guarantee? You may, and this comes to my next point, run credit checks on your potential customers to see if they're worth the risk. But if that shows they are not, and you contract anyway, would you ask for a personal guarantee from a director? If you're not dealing with a limited company, would you do an asset check to see if an individual, for example, owns a property? Are they worth the money, or are they worth the risk you're providing to them? As I say, and I keep hitting home, if you're not going to be paid, there is no point in getting the order on the books. Sales team need to appreciate that and get as much information as possible to protect your business. Although credit control can be viewed as merely a stick to hit customers with who have not paid, it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. In my view, credit control can be used to improve your business. Often, credit control procedures are the first people the customers will have spoken to after the sales team have been in. The sales team have been in, the product supplied, the services rendered, and thereafter an invoice sent. Between then and the credit control team getting involved, there may be no contact between your business and the customer. So the credit controllers have the opportunity to communicate effectively with your customers to establish if there are any issues with the product supplied, if there are any issues with the customer's business which is preventing them from payment, if there are any further future sales opportunities which you as a business can assist with. Obviously, you may be looking for monies on account for those future sales, you may not, but at least it gives you the opportunity to really get to know your customer's business and really get to know how you can help them and facilitate them through their potential issues due to the non-payment of the invoice. Of course, and most historically, you would use credit control as an early indicator for troublesome accounts. So although it may flag up to you future sales opportunities, it will also flag up to you future accounts which you shouldn't do any further business with, and you should certainly stick well clear of. So how would you implement or how would you improve a credit control procedure to make it more effective? I'm often asked, is there any reason or is there any framework we must follow in terms of letters sent, telephone calls made, etc.? Well, the simple answer is no. It's whatever suits your business. If an invoice has fallen due, you can technically issue proceedings immediately. Although the court will of course expect you to enter into dialogue before doing so, there is no reason other than potentially court sanctions for you not to issue a claim. But of course that isn't the case, and credit control procedure is in place to stop you having to invest in court proceedings and incur the high level of court fees and the like. So the general answer is, what is an effective credit control procedure? It's a framework which suits your company. As I say, there's no right or wrong answer, and it will come down to how long you wait for payment of your invoices, or of course the payment terms of your invoices. I would say, as a general rule of thumb, for an invoice which is payable 30 days after being rendered, you would be looking to make an email or a phone call shortly before the invoice is due, as a quick reminder. It's followed by a letter a few days after it is due, as again a reminder, followed by another phone call. And all in all, I would look to build in 3 phone calls stroke emails, 2 to 3 letters within a period of between 20 and 28 days. I certainly don't believe you should wait longer than 28 days after the invoice has fallen due for payment before you issue the letter of demand, i.e. a court letter of demand. I'll touch on that more in my second webinar, which looks at the new pre-action protocol for debt claims. But you must be aware that under the new protocol, which covers all debts owed by individuals to businesses, fundamentally, that once the letter of claim has been sent on those cases, you have to wait at least 30 days before you can issue a claim. With that in mind, you might want to then look at your credit control procedures to narrow or reduce maybe 1 letter and 1 phone call, because at the end of your credit control procedure, the letter of claim can be sent, but you have to wait a month, 30 days before then issuing a claim. So you need to be aware of that, and that can really bite into your cash flow if you're not aware and you carry on using your old credit control procedures. I will say the pre-action protocol does not affect debts owed between businesses or debt owed by a business to a business. There, the court would still look at the old practice direction on pre-action conduct and expect reasonable amounts of correspondence or attempts at correspondence before a claim issued, and the letter of claim giving at least 14 days plus days of service for a response, 18 days. So you've still got that in the background for a business-to-business debt. You will know the relevant cases where a credit control procedure will not be effective. If you can argue and justify yourself as to why you've not followed the credit control procedure, and certainly justify yourself to the court why you've not followed a credit control procedure, then you should be fine. There was always the odd case where they're always late in paying. You all know that. You all know how best to get monies in on those small number of cases. The final point I would make on this slide is, do not make idle threats. By this I mean, do not say you're going to issue proceedings and then not do so. Do not say you're going to pursue a winding up petition or the like and then not do so. Idle threats will soon get around your customer base, who will know that you're making threats but not following them through. And of course will lead to your letters being ignored, etc., etc. So if you're going to do something and say you're going to do it, then you must do it, in my view. So I mentioned this is a 3-part webinar series. The third part will look specifically into claims and enforcement action. But for those who can't listen to my third webinar, what if a customer fails to pay despite having the best credit control procedures in place and the like? Well, fundamentally, my first point is that will have weeded out all the cases where you know you are unlikely to get your money back. Hopefully, going back to your sales team, they will have obtained all relevant information. You will have done an asset check or a credit check. You will know, getting through your credit control procedure, you will know the people who are likely to pay if a claim is issued, and you'll know the best cases to invest in issuing legal proceedings. So by legal proceedings, I mean a claim form which is served. If ignored, after 14 days after service, you can obtain a county court judgment with a view to then undertaking enforcement action, i.e. sending in bailiffs and the like. In the correct cases, where there is an undisputed debt of over £5,000 for bankruptcy individual cases and £750 for company corporate cases, you could issue a statutory demand with a view to then undertaking or issuing or presenting, should I say, sorry, an insolvency petition to the court. That is a winding up petition in a company situation and a bankruptcy petition for an individual. You shouldn't use those as a form of debt collection. It should only be used with a view to then obtaining a winding up or bankruptcy order. But of course, a lot of people use the insolvency route to pressurise companies and individuals into making payment to avoid an insolvency order being made. I will deal with this, as I say, more in my third webinar. What, however, and we see this quite often, a customer becomes insolvent. So sometimes when we've issued a claim, or even before the claim, we get letters in from insolvency practitioners saying Mr. So-and-so or X, Y, and Z Limited have become insolvent. What happens then? It's not the end of the world. You should be aware that any payments you obtain by way of a dividend should be viewed as a bonus, and that you should always stake your claim against the insolvent estate. You will generally obtain a proof of debt form to complete, where you can set the amount, reasons behind the debt, etc., etc. Lodge that with the insolvency practitioner, and then internally maybe take with you to write off the debt. If you do obtain a dividend payment on the back of filing a claim, then that is a bonus, and will probably be many years down the line anyway. I make the point here that insolvency practitioners have powers to review transactions which have occurred prior to the insolvency, and if possible can apply to overturn these. These powers are not necessarily open to you as a creditor, which therefore, as I say, not the end of the world if an insolvency situation happens whilst you're dealing with a case. Just expanding on that a little more, officers of a company can also be investigated as directors if monies have gone into the director's back pocket from the company accounts or the like. These are issues which an insolvency practitioner can look at and look to overturn. In relation to personal insolvency, and one we see very often, a bankrupt may own or have an interest in a property. If it's a family home, then after the first year after the bankruptcy order, a trustee in bankruptcy can then look to realise that property for the benefit of bankruptcy creditors. We're talking generally years here for any sort of realisations to come back. So internally, you, as I say, probably take the view to write off a debt for an insolvent company, person, but you may also receive a dividend some way down the line, but don't expect you to do so. So what is my final message? Final message is, and I think hopefully I've come across quite clear on this, know your client. All the information your sales team can gain when the order is placed is vitally important. Legal identity of your customer, contact details for your customer, all those will help form an opinion and know and help you to know which cases you invest in when it comes to issuing a claim. As I say, any questions? I appreciate you're listening to this on a recording. If you do wish to ask any questions specifically, my contact details are on the front of this webinar. Just call those up, bear with me. Here they are. So my email address and my telephone number is there. Please feel free to contact me to ask any questions you may have. Hopefully we'll be able to assist. But for now, that is all. My next webinar is specifically on the pre-action protocol for debt claims. That's going to be at the beginning of beginning of November now. So hopefully you found this webinar useful, and then you will sign up for my next webinar. Thank you.